All right, so I have 301 on my end, so we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's office hours on the Department of Education's final administrative capability rule and its implications for clinical rotations. My name is Tyler Smith, and I'm the Senior Director of Government Relations at PAEA, and I'm pleased to be joined by some of our colleagues here today on our advocacy team from Polsinelli. Before we get started, I just wanted to kick off with a few housekeeping notes. So for those who registered but couldn't attend live, we will be recording today's session. We'll also be kicking off today with a brief presentation to really set the stage for our discussion prior to turning to your Q&A. If you have questions at any point, please go ahead and enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and then we'll get to those after we get through the slides today. While we have set aside plenty of time for questions live, if you do have any additional questions following today's office hours, please feel free to contact me at tsmith@paeaonline.org. So before we jump into the presentation, I just wanted to take some time to introduce you to some of our colleagues on the advocacy team. So as many of you may know, if you've interacted with PAEA's Government Relations Department, we have partnered with the Polsinelli law firm for a number of years to help expand our federal advocacy footprint. So we're pleased to be joined today by three of our partners who have many years of experience in federal policymaking, and particularly with both Congress and the executive branch. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to them to introduce themselves. So if we could get started with Julius and then Sylvia and Tim, we'll do introductions and then we'll jump into the content today. So Julius.
Thanks a lot, Tyler, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm Julius Hobson, Senior Policy Advisor at Polsinelli. I do a lot of healthcare along with appropriations, budget, taxes, and financial services. We've all been at Polsinelli for well over 10 years. I've worked in the House and the Senate, DC government, lobbied for Howard University, where I went to undergraduate school, and I'm an adjunct professor at George Washington University, where I teach lobbying and legislative writing and research. Sylvia?
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sylvia Cornegie. I'm a policy advisor with Polsinelli. Have had the pleasure of working with PAEA for a number of years. My work focuses on the committees of jurisdiction you all might be familiar with: House Education and Workforce, Senate Health, Energy and Commerce to a certain extent as well. And I know we're all excited to be here today and answer any questions you might have.
Yeah, Tim Perrin, policy advisor here at Polsinelli, and at the risk of boring you and repeating kind of a lot of what Julius and Sylvia said, I'll just say what they said. I been a lobbyist for a while, working with PAEA, and yeah, happy to talk with y'all. So thanks.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for all of your work and for joining us here today. So we'd like to kick off today's presentation with some initial context. So just to start at the very basics, the U.S. Department of Education has oversight of all institutions of higher education that participate in federal student aid programs, which encompasses essentially all PA programs. As part of this oversight authority, the department has long instituted what are known as administrative capability regulations, essentially rules that ensure that universities have the internal infrastructure needed to responsibly and effectively administer student aid programs and ensure a high quality education for students. Earlier this year, the department issued a new set of proposed administrative capability regulations to increase oversight in several key areas of higher education. Of note to us, this is the first time in recent memory that the department proposed to start regulating institutional responsibility for facilitating clinical rotations. In the department's proposed rule, the administration included proposed language stating that institutions must provide students with geographically accessible clinical or externship opportunities related to and required for the completion of the credential or licensure in a recognized occupation within 45 days of the successful completion of other required coursework. As you might imagine, this raised a number of concerns within the health professions education community. For example, what would this proposal mean for the majority of programs that rely on remote placements in response to clinical site shortages, or as part of rural training tracks? When exactly would the clock start on the 45-day requirement? And then finally, why is this within the purview of the department while the ARCPA already requires institutions to facilitate placements for students? To voice these concerns, PAEA submitted comments to the department shortly following the release of the proposed rule, requesting either elimination of the proposal or significant modifications to address some of these concerns that we identified. Following the comment period, the department released its final rule at the end of October, providing significant new flexibilities in response to stakeholder comments. For example, on the definition of geographically accessible, the department explicitly clarified that clinical requirements as part of graduate programs can be in another part of the country. So this effectively means that the geographically accessible requirement will have no impact for PA education as we initially anticipated with the proposed rule. In terms of the 45-day requirement, the department explicitly said that the requirement does not mean that experiences must start exactly within 45 days. However, the department will consider whether a pattern where these experiences start well outside reasonable periods is in fact a sign that an institution is not abiding by this requirement. So effectively, this aligns with existing ARCPA standards in terms of institutional responsibility for facilitating rotations and is not expected to result in significant new implications for programs. So with all this in mind, a few key takeaways that we have for programs. So while the original proposed rule was a significant threat for us, given the heavy reliance of programs on remote and out-of-state placements, the department's final rule is anticipated to have much less of an impact on programs than might have been the case earlier this year, and in effect mirrors what is already required by the ARC. In terms of the 45-day requirement, the department further clarified that enforcement will be concentrated solely on institutions that display a consistent pattern of not facilitating placements for programs, something that is already in place by the ARC. So bottom line, programs can continue to facilitate remote and rural placements as needed and desired. We do anticipate that for other professions where institutional responsibility for facilitating rotations is not required by accreditation standards, that this will have more of an impact, but we don't anticipate there will be as significant of implications for PA programs as we might have imagined with the proposed rule. So with that, we're going to turn to questions. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to add them into the Q&A, and we'll be happy to answer anything that might be top of mind for you. So I see the first question came in. If we send a student to a rural clinical site where we don't have housing, this does not cause issues with this statement. No, so in the department's final rule and justification, they explicitly discussed that particularly graduate programs that have clinical training requirements often do want to place students in rural communities, either because they want to influence practice in those communities, or they have to because they're not able to find clinical sites in their community. So there should be no concerns, even if you're running into housing issues for your students from the perspective of this final rule. All right. Does the panel know the context of this action? Was there a specific issue or court case that triggered this new rule? That's a great question. So I don't know exactly if there's a particular concern that prompted this. I do know that in the department's final rule, they did discuss issues where other disciplines like nursing programs were recruiting classes that were significantly beyond their capacity to secure clinical rotations. So I think the department was responding to some of those concerns when they floated this proposal. And like I said before, I think some of the disciplines where the accreditation standards aren't as rigid as PA education's are may face more concerns from this than we ultimately ended up doing. So.
Yeah, and just to add to that, there is some language in the final rule that talked about, I think more vaguely, like Tyler alluded to, the fact that in institutional program reviews, they did find some issues that they were unable to currently address. And their rationale is when an institution, quote unquote, exhibits problems, the department often lacks the ability to hold them accountable. So it seems like it was an ongoing issue that they had spotted in their reviews.
Thanks so much, Sylvia. Okay, so another question, is there any background on this rule that can help us avoid any unintended consequences? So a couple of resources that I would point you to. So PAEA published a detailed analysis on our website and in the networker a couple of weeks ago. So if you would like any more written information, that's accessible on our website. As part of that analysis, we also included the text of the full final rule that includes some additional discussion about sort of the rationale for this policy and why the department took the action that it did. So we would encourage you to take a look at that as well. Another question, will this rule be reviewed in the future? Is there a timeline for review where there may be more restrictions? So that's a great question. So these requirements, in addition to other things that were addressed by the final rule, will go into effect on July 1st of 2024. The department periodically reviews the implementation of its final regulations and goes through processes to promulgate new rules. So it's possible that this issue may be revisited in the future during future cycles of rulemaking, but there isn't necessarily a set cycle where we anticipate that to happen.
Heather, just to build on that, there is the political element of this where there could be oversight from Congress, from the Senate Help Committee, the Health, Education, and Labor and Pensions Committee, or the Education and the Workforce Committee on the House side, where there could be questions from those members of Congress about the rule or how it is being implemented, or if there were unintended consequences. That some of those may take place down the line, but obviously in an election year, when political tempers run hot, you never know when these issues can arise.
That's a great point, Tim. All right, a few more questions came in. So with regard to the 45-day rule, do we interpret this broadly as meaning that following successful completion of the didactic phase, clinical rotations must begin within 45 days? So that is a great question, and really the one that we've been grappling with for the past 6 months as we've been working on this from an advocacy perspective. So the short answer is it's ambiguous when the department considers the clock to be ticking still. So is that the end of the didactic year? Does that include, breaks that programs might have between the didactic year and the clinical year? I will say that the clarification that the department has given indicates that they aren't looking to crack down on, if your rotation starts like 46 days after the end of your didactic year. They're really trying to crack down on instances where programs demonstrate a consistent pattern of not having enough placements for their students. So we're going to continue to work to better understand where the department's thinking is on the 45-day rule, but they have given assurances that they're essentially looking to crack down on instances where programs are offering placements significantly after the completion of didactic coursework. Continuing on the 45-day question, is the 45-day issue mostly about ensuring that students moving from the didactic to clinical phase of the PA program are able to be placed on rotations within 45 days to complete the didactic year? I don't quite understand the 45-day issue. Again, that builds upon sort of the point that I was making before. So, when you had instances of programs like nursing programs or other programs that lead to, licensure or credentials, they are really trying to go after the folks who are enrolling people that they are completely unable to facilitate placements for. my read, and Polsonelli, feel free to jump in on this, from the department's clarification is they're really seeking to go after bad actors rather than clamping down on slight variations from the 45-day mark.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And then, just going through some of the comment and discussion posts within the final rule, it's lengthy, but it's pretty informative. The language that the department uses says that institutions must provide students the opportunity within 45 days. Again, I think the fact that it's ambiguous certainly holds there. But the department also talks about the fact, are you doing it on day 45 or day 46, telling students where they're posted, as opposed to making them a promise for a spot a year out. So I think that's where it also gets, into this fine line between how soon after the didactic do they have the opportunity lined up, which is also different from how soon afterwards do they start. So I think what we'll probably be looking for on a lot of these issues, Ed is very fond of issuing sub-regulatory guidance. So I think that's also the next step in a lot of this, to see what else it comes out with to clarify some of these terms.
Thanks, Sylvia. A couple of things. So questions on international rotations. So international rotations are okay since they're elective and not one of those 7 required ARCPA skibbies. Correct. Required rotations are all completed in the U.S. With the guidance stating rotations must be geographically accessible in the U.S., does that eliminate the option of a student completing a non-core rotation internationally? No. So international rotations that are elective are fine, as all international rotations are. This regulation specifically speaks to required rotations that are necessary for licensure. So international placements that your program might be facilitating should be completely fine. So another great question, how is compliance monitored by the Department of Education? So institutions are responsible for complying with a wide number of federal regulations through the Department of Education to stay compliant with Title IV. So there are routine reporting and auditing procedures that institutions are responsible for. For something like this, typically an investigation might arise if like a complaint were made to the department that a program was out of compliance with this. I will say it is quite a rare occurrence for the department to withdraw access to federal student aid programs from institutions. So it's while compliance is important, enforcement is not always consistent. So Polsonelli, if there's anything else you want to add in on that, feel free.
Yeah, I would add that you also have Inspector General for the department, who can also institute an investigation and present a report to the department.
And a lot of those would be driven by complaints or whistleblower indications there.
All right, lots of great questions. For folks who might have come in since we started, feel free to add any more questions you might have in the Q&A box, and we'll be happy to get to those as well. All right, we'll give it just another minute or so. Will the PowerPoint and recording be available? Yes, we do plan on sending along the PowerPoint and recording to everyone who registered today, whether you attended live or not. So that'll be available, and we'll also continue publishing any updates that we might get from the department on our website as well. Absolutely. All right, well, if it doesn't look like there are any more questions, so we want to thank you all for attending and staying engaged in the federal regulatory process. Like I said, we will be making the recording and PowerPoint available by email shortly after this wraps up. And if you ever have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me or anyone else on our team. So thank you all and have a great rest of your day.